Okay. So have you ever like stared at your phone after a breakup debating like, is this the time for the you up text?
Oh, tell me you haven't been there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking, breakups are like universally rough, right?
hmm
But for Gen Z dealing with heartbreak, it's like a whole other ball game.
With social media and everything.
Exactly. It's a
Mm.
constantly bombarded with everyone else's highlight reel.
Yeah.
So that's what we're diving into today. We're dissecting this article. We found 8 must-know tips for Gen Z dealing with breakups.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Not like your typical relationship advice column.
Yeah, I'm curious. What's the
So
angle?
instead of just like listing these tips, we're going to like unpack them,
Okay.
figure out like what makes them tick.
Yeah.
Why does this resonate with Gen Z?
I think that's what's so fascinating about stuff like this. You can learn a lot about a generation by how they deal with something as universal as heartbreak.
Totally. And the first tip is like straight out of the breakup playbook. Resisting the urge to like bury yourself in ice cream and binge watch every rom-com ever.
Ugh, the classic distractions.
Right. Like it's almost expected.
Oh, for sure. It's like a reflex almost to want to numb the pain.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, distractions, they only work for so long.
Okay. That makes sense.
Deep down, you're just putting off dealing with those like raw, messy
And
emotions.
those emotions, they don't just magically disappear, do they?
Nope. They tend to stick around, like that one sock that always gets lost in the dryer.
Okay. So then what's the alternative? Because the article suggests like actually sitting with your sadness.
It does, doesn't it?
And I don't know about you, but that seems kind of radical.
Yeah, especially for a generation that's like constantly plugged in, constantly stimulated.
Right. Like, am I supposed to just sit here with my sad playlist and like marinate in it?
Well, think of it this way. Gen Z is also really into mindfulness, right?
Mm,
Like meditation, being present. This tip is basically that. It's about building emotional literacy.
okay. I like that emotional literacy.
Yeah, it's not just about surviving a breakup. It's about learning how to handle your emotions in any situation.
So it's like a life skill.
Exactly.
And that takes us to the next tip. Rediscovering yourself after a breakup.
Ooh, yeah, figuring out who you are without the we.
Right. Like they use this example of someone who loved painting before they got into a relationship.
Yeah,
And then during the relationship, they kind of stopped.
happens all the time, right?
Totally. But then after the breakup, they pick up a paintbrush again.
Yeah.
And it's like this aha moment.
It's like, oh yeah, this is something I love. This is part of me.
Exactly. And I think this is where things get really interesting with Gen Z because their sense of self is so intertwined with technology and social media.
Right. They've grown up with this online persona.
So when a relationship ends, it's not just like processing the emotional loss, it's also navigating this shift in their digital identity.
It adds a whole other layer to the mix, doesn't it?
Totally. It's like hitting the reset button on your life and figuring out like, who am I now? What do I want to put out there?
Yeah, and that can feel daunting, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly empowering.
Because it's like you're in the driver's seat now.
Right. You get to decide who you want to be.
And that brings us to this next tip that honestly kind of blew my mind. Instead of avoiding all the places that remind you of your ex, the article suggests you go back there.
Really?
Yeah, like that cafe where you had your first date, that park bench where you had your first kiss. They're saying go there.
Wow. That's like the opposite of what you'd
I
expect.
know, right? But here's the thing. Gen Z is all about like reinterpreting and remixing things.
True. Think about memes. They take something old and give it a new meaning.
Exactly. So it's like you're taking those old memories and infusing them with new experiences.
We're reclaiming those spaces.
Yes. It's like you're not letting the past have power over you anymore.
Because the past is just a story we tell ourselves, right?
And you get to decide how that story ends.
Exactly. Okay, this is making me rethink my whole post-breakup routine.
Right. And speaking of rethinking things, let's talk about boundaries.
Ooh, yes. The ever-present dilemma.
It's tough for anyone,
Yeah.
but especially in the age of social media where it's so easy to just like casually stalk your ex online.
Oh, tell me you haven't done the late-night Instagram deep dive.
Who hasn't? But what's interesting is this article frames boundaries not as punishment, but as self-kindness.
That's a good way to put it.
Because it's about recognizing your worth and putting your well-being first.
And that aligns so well with what we know about Gen Z. They're all about mental health and self-care.
Right. It's like they're saying, okay, I still care about you, but I need to love myself more.
And that's a powerful message because sometimes loving someone means letting go.
And that leads us to the next tip, which is all about reflection.
Oh, this should be good.
But not like the kind where you're replaying every fight and analyzing every text message.
No more overthinking every detail.
Exactly. It's about understanding why the relationship ended. but not to place blame.
More like a learning opportunity.
Exactly. The article asks this really thought-provoking question.
Hmm.
It says, what if, instead of focusing on their mistakes, you took control of your own narrative?
Ooh, I like that. Taking control.
Right. Because closure isn't something someone else can give you. It's something you find within yourself.
It's about owning your part in the story.
Exactly. And learning from it, so you can write an even better chapter next time.
And I think that really speaks to Gen Z's desire for authenticity. They want real, genuine connections.
And you don't get that by repeating the same patterns.
Exactly.
No.
Okay, so we've talked about self-care, boundaries, reflection.
Mm.
What else does this Gen Z breakup survival guide have in store?
Okay, so we've talked about self-care, boundaries, reflection. What else does this Gen Z breakup survival guide have in store?
Well, this next one might seem obvious. Lean on your people.
Okay, so like call your best friend, have a good cry session.
Exactly, but also like family, maybe even that one super supportive aunt.
Oh yeah, Aunt Carol always knows what to say.
Right, and I think what's interesting here is that even though Gen Z is super tech savvy,
Digital natives?
exactly, they still recognize the importance of those real-life connections.
Because sometimes you just need a hug,
A real hug, not a digital one.
not an emoji.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final and probably most important tip from this article.
Okay, drum roll, please.
Trust the process.
Trust the process.
Yeah. And I know that sounds kind of vague.
Like, what does that even mean?
Right. But the article emphasizes that healing takes time.
It's not like an instant microwave meal.
Nope. It's more like baking a sourdough bread.
Okay, let's need to explain.
So it takes time, right? You got to be patient. There are going to be good days and bad days.
Ups and downs.
Exactly. You might even feel like you're back to square one sometimes.
Like you're making progress and then boom,
Back to binge watching rom-coms with a pint of ice cream.
been there. But this tip is like saying, hey, that's okay.
It's normal. It's part of the process.
Because healing isn't linear.
Exactly. And I think that's such an important message for Gen Z. They're used to things happening quickly, instantly.
They've got the world at their fingertips.
Right. But healing heartbreak, it doesn't work like that.
It's more of a marathon than a sprint.
Exactly. And that brings us to like a bigger question. What does this all say about Gen Z's approach to relationships?
Because we're talking about breakups,
Mm.
but it's really about so much more than that, isn't it?
It's about how they view love, commitment, even their own identities.
It's like they're rewriting the rule book.
In a way, yeah. They're not afraid to be vulnerable, to talk about their feelings.
Just set boundaries, prioritize their well-being.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can all learn from.
Because at the end of the day, no matter what generation you belong to, heartbreak is a universal language.
It's something we all experience at some point.
And if we can approach it with a little more self-compassion, a little more understanding,
Maybe it doesn't have to be so scary.
right, maybe it can be an opportunity for growth, for learning.
For becoming even better versions of ourselves.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into how Gen Z navigates heartbreak, what's your biggest takeaway?
For me, it's the emphasis on self-compassion. No matter what generation you belong to, breakups are tough.
Totally. Those woulda, coulda, shoulda thoughts can be relentless.
Exactly. And this article is like a gentle reminder to be kind to yourself during those moments, to recognize that healing takes time, and to celebrate the small victories along the way.
It's like they're saying, hey, you're doing the best you can with a heart that's still mending. Give yourself some grace. And for anyone listening who might be going through it, remember, you are not alone. There's a whole generation out there redefining what it means to heal, to grow, and to love authentically. And that's something worth celebrating.
You know, it's funny. This whole conversation, it kind of reminds me of something we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
About how Gen Z is all about like rewriting the rules.
Right. Like they're not afraid to question things.
Exactly. And it's not just about relationships, right? It's like they're
Right.
challenging all these societal norms.
Totally. It's like they're looking at the world and saying, okay, we see what you're doing, but we think you can do it better.
Yes. And not in an arrogant way, but in a way that's like really thoughtful. Like they're actually trying to figure out how to make things better for everyone.
And that's what's so refreshing. It's not
Right.
just about complaining or rebelling. It's about like actually trying to create positive change.
Exactly. And you see that in their approach to heartbreak, too. They're not just accepting it as this inevitable thing, like, oh, well, everyone goes through it.
It's more like, okay, this sucks, but what can we learn from it? How can we use this experience to grow?
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful message because heartbreak, can be so isolating.
Oh, absolutely. You
Yeah.
feel like you're the only one going through it.
Right. But Gen Z, they're using technology to connect with each other, to create these online communities where vulnerability is not just accepted, it's celebrated.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to be funny about it either.
Oh my gosh, the memes.
Like, some of them are brutal.
But also kind of amazing.
Exactly. Because they're finding humor in the darkness, which I think is so important.
It's a coping mechanism.
It is. And it's like they're saying, hey, this might be tough, but we're going to get through it together.
And that's a powerful message, I think, for all of us to remember no matter what generation we belong to.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
Honestly, I hope they just feel a little less alone. Breakups are tough. Heartbreak is tough. But it's something we all go through. And if we can be a little kinder to ourselves, a little more understanding, maybe it doesn't have to be so scary.
Beautifully said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into how Gen Z navigates heartbreak. We'll get you next time.